Hello, and welcome to Potholes and Politics, Maine Municipal Association's podcast covering the local Maine issues from A to Z. This week, we are featuring heavily the much maligned issue of Maine roads. If you've ever hit a pothole, that's what we're talking about.
This is a great topic to be doing. Probably wondering what goes into the road work, how it's constructed, what the budget is comprised of. And so here over the next hour or so, we've got a collection of interviews and vignettes that will hopefully give our listeners a better understanding of how towns are managing their road networks, what the state is trying to do to help, and then, of course, the pesky issue of private roads. You know, something that I was constantly struck by with everyone I spoke to about this is just how expensive roads are. It is, even putting aside the recent inflationary pressures, these are big pieces of infrastructure for towns and ultimately require a lot of maintenance, require a lot of attention. We obviously know how important it is to keep the roads clear in the winter. And so for public works departments around the state, this is a big part of what they are doing with their time and unfortunately are expending a decent amount of taxpayer dollars on it because there doesn't seem to be much assistance from the state. And that's a reality that we're going to hear in Jackman today, a little bit from DOT as well.
Yeah, Neil, that's a great point. And what it's also interesting is that the majority of the tax that is being used to pay for these roads is property tax, meaning that while Maine's population blossoms 35 million every tourist season, the people who are maintaining the roads that those tourists drive on are largely the people who have property and pay property tax within those communities. And we know that all communities are not the same size, not created equal, not even have the same number of roads. But the biggest lift is definitely at that local level. And they're using a variety of different methods. Actually, they're competing in some ways against state contracts to find contractors to provide those services. They don't have a choice in many instances. While some communities might be able to afford a full-time public works department, others are reliant on contractors or a mixture of both. And those contractors are few and far between. So it's often a question of whether or not you have work done or whether or not you have no work done. The reality is in most local communities, just finding someone to do the job is tough enough without adding to activities that are beyond their statutory requirements, even though they might have a due diligence importance. There's no alternative. And then it's that local litigation that's required to go after that.
That's a great introduction to our first piece today, speaking with the Public Works Director, Doug Worcester, and Town Manager, Cheryl Nadeau from the Town of Jackman, in which they are wrestling with a lot of this. They are a small public works department sort of competing for private contracts. And you're going to hear in just a moment a really great story of actually a private contractor coming to save the day when MDOT didn't have the capacity to keep up with what was an emergency on one of their main thoroughfare roads. We're going to go now to the Town of Jackman. Doug and Cheryl, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Well, we're here to talk about roads, which here in the shoulder season of the fall, there's probably maybe some last minute road work from the summer that's outstanding, but as well, gearing up for winter maintenance. Doug, could you just share a bit of your municipal experience, how you wound up in this role, and what the Director of Public Works in Jackman does?
Well, I've been here about 17 years. I started here, I used to work in the woods, and I wanted to work in town so I could be with my kids more. That's basically why I took the job. So I could go to my kids' sporting games, and I was missing out on all that stuff. So that's why I switched to this job. Pretty much, I take care of the whole town by myself. and we help DOT out a lot. You know, we help them out, you know, with backhoes, and, you know, we're over there a dozen times a year helping them. I do all the mowing in town. We do all the maintenance on the vehicles.
How many vehicles does Jackman have, and what types?
We have two. We have a 3500 and a 550. Yes, plus we have two backhoes that we have to maintain. Plus we got a John Deere over at the airport because we have an airport we have to take care of too. There's a lot to that too.
And not to get off topic here, but are you receiving any federal funding to maintain that airport and that runway?
The federal funds that we get are for specific projects, but not for, like, we don't get funds to help cover maintenance, basic maintenance, or even maintenance equipment. Mm-hmm. So our federal funds that we've been receiving is for any projects to improve the airport. We've extended the runway and widened the runway, that sort of thing.
Yeah, big projects. Way above my pay scale.
Briefly, could you explain what the road network in Jackman looks like? What sort of mix of roads are in town?
Well, we have, I'm guessing, about 4 miles of dirt roads that we have to maintain, grading, filling potholes, that kind of thing. And then the other 9.5 miles are all hot top. Some of them are pretty good, and some they need some work.
What leads to a road needing work? Is it deferred maintenance? Is it heavy use because of recent construction nearby? How does a road fall into disrepair?
Because it's been 20 years since they've been redone. That's why. That's basically the reason, and we don't have enough money to keep fixing them like they should be. Because we just fixed a road, 2 years ago?
I think it was 2 years ago.
And I'm pretty sure it was about $500,000 to fix this one road.
How long of a stretch was that?
Not even a mile.
Wow.
It's a little road.
It's just a little road. It goes down to the lake and makes a loop and it comes back around. But it was basically $500,000. It's a lot of money for a little town.
For just resurfacing or a full repair? One
little section was completely reconstructed, and then the rest of it was just ground and then put hot top on. So a lot of money.
And what about your winter responsibility? How does the seasons affect what it is you're doing with your road network?
Well, we try to get them as smooth as we can. So we're not breaking stuff on the plow. We're not catching things. We try to get everything as smooth as we can.
In terms of winter plowing then, how many drivers would you have during an average snowstorm?
2 guys.
Two guys.
Me and my other guy. We take care of everything.
What's the longest plowing shift you've ever done, if you can remember?
It was maybe when I first started, when we had a lot of snow. It was probably 17, 18 hours. Yeah. But I mean, it snowed. I think we got 3-4 feet of snow. Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming. There's so much snow that it's crazy.
Yeah, and you're up there a little bit in the mountains a bit, the Western Mountains. So I'm sure that makes some of the roads just even more difficult to pass, slightly more treacherous.
It's not the snow, it's the rain that makes it. Snow is no problem. It's when we get rain, freezing rain, that's when it's bad. That's when roads are slippery. That's when bad things happen, for sure.
For a little bit, I'd like to talk about the budget. The municipal budget is an often scrutinized things for a lot of towns and local governments. And I imagine that the public works road budget is no different. So what goes into the road budget? What do you wish would go into it? And what do you think the big holdup is for more funding?
That'd be your department. There's just not enough money to go around. We're giving money here, we're giving money there, and we're so small of a town that we kind of got to suck it up to not get, the school's getting a big part of the portion, the county's getting a big part. Now we have a hospital that we have to give a big portion. They're getting all big portions and we just get a small amount of money, and that's just how it's always been. That's how we deal with it. Mm-hmm. We just deal with it.
So typically in our budget, we do try to make sure we're adding to the public works and roads departments on a yearly basis. We include some money for them, but it's never really enough. We try to make sure we're covering for maintenance costs of the vehicles, the sand and the salt, those kind of things, and maybe a little extra, but there's just, as he said, there's so much going on and so much that we have to fund, like this medical program here, that is sort of minimal. I guess that's the best word. It's sort of minimal. And what we wish would be in there is that we account for the worst case scenarios always, so that your budget is a little bit higher for all of a sudden the truck is busted, or then what do? You're stuck.
Without the vehicles to do the work or the plowing, it's hard to get anything done. Would it be fair to say that maybe MDOT could be a little bit more generous? Would that help, or is it just too little too late?
That would be great, because the amount of money that they offer is not very much, so I think it came out for us to fill out that paperwork. We recently got it, and I think we're saying this time we're going to just save it for our future project, because such a small amount that it's not going to make a difference. You sort of have to bank it, really.
Doug, what are some of those future projects next year, 5 years that are on your to-do list?
Next year.
I actually have no idea. Because we don't have enough money to do any of the roads. I mean, we have one road that really needs to get done, and I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's hard to plow it. We can't even sweep it because you're breaking equipment because it's so rough. But I don't even know what it would cost. $1 million to fix it. I mean, I don't even know. That's a big problem. 5 years, but in 5 years it's going to be 40% more than what it is now. We're kind of, I hate to use the word, we're kind of screwed.
What are you hearing from your residents? Do they often complain, or are they satisfied?
No, they're not. And I can't say that. There's only a handful of people that complain, really. It's really a great town. They really don't complain much. There's just a handful of people.
Most of those are on
Addy.
On the dirt
right,
roads.
on the dirt roads. They're the ones complaining. But like I tell them, I didn't buy your house on a dirt road. So you have to deal with the dust. I mean, you bought your house on a dirt road.
Yeah.
We can't be putting out calcium every week. We don't have enough money.
And we could probably spend an hour talking about private roads and the headaches that those cause. Is there a large network of private roads in Jackman, or minimal?
On our one road, there's 1, 2, there's 3 private roads
on that one stretch.
On that one stretch.
Are those well-functioning road associations? Do they get maintained consistently?
No.
So earlier you had mentioned working and supporting some of MDOT's efforts. What is that partnership like? Do they ever come to the rescue? It sort of sounds like you're more of their safety net than the other way around.
They do help me if I need some coal patch or to fill potholes on the tire. They do give me coal patch and stuff. And I'm sure if I asked for more stuff, they would help me, but I do help them more than they help me, for sure. A lot of times they don't have a backhoe. They don't even have a backhoe. So I have to go over, load their trucks, do that kind of stuff. We want to have a good relationship with DOT. It's a good thing, because when I first started, we didn't have a good relationship. It's just a lot better to have a good relationship.
Absolutely. And I think that would go across for every level of government. Would agree with that.
Exactly.
I can't end this conversation with asking about one recent news story. It made national headlines, but
what is that? It was about 10.
Recently.
Oh, well, I don't even know what happened.
Yeah, you do.
Oh, I think you'll remember it. So about maybe it was a month or two ago, there was a washout on a state maintained road, and the headlines were 163-mile detour. What was that? And what was the real issue? How did it get resolved?
And it was really a lie, because you could get, there's a way to get around. They didn't, it was
the locals didn't want you to know that, though.
Well, the locals know, but all you had to do was just drive up the road another 6 miles, and you could just detour around 12 miles, really, basically.
But I think DOT doesn't allow
They don't.
making a detour over dirt roads.
Right.
So that was the thing, is there is a way around that, as Doug said, but that way around is a dirt road. And I don't believe that DOT allows legally make a detour, go down a dirt road. So that's why it was such a big loop.
Especially, I'm sure, for some of those big semi trucks and tractor trailers, that would have been difficult.
But it's funny, that's where the tractor trailers go. They go down this road.
What was that? Was that just washout from heavy rains? How did that obstruction occur?
We got like 5.5 inches of rain in like 24 hours, 26 hours. There was just so much water. A lot of it is because there's so much building going on here and there's a lot of cutting. So all this water is getting rerouted into different areas. So that's why we're dealing with this problem. We have the same problem on one of our roads. It's kind of a hill that goes up, and there's so many places getting built that they're rerouting the water, and it's all coming to us. And someday we're not going to be able to handle it. I mean, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 18-inch pipes, culverts, and they were completely full of water coming down the hill. So that's a lot of water.
From what you're explaining, this problem might only get worse or more frequent. Rains are getting heavier each season, and if development is part of it, well, that's not going to start decreasing. That
for sure. I think 3 years ago, before Cheryl came, I think we got 6 inches of rain in like, it wasn't very long, where we wiped out one of our roads down your street.
Yeah.
But it just blew it right out. You know, that happens a lot.
Not to leave our audience on a cliffhanger, how was that washout resolved? Was MDOT there in a sufficient time, able to make that repair?
Nope. It was a local guy in town. Him and his guys, they're the ones who fixed it.
Wow.
Yeah, they hired it out because DOT said it was going to be 2 to 3 weeks because they couldn't find the pipe, they couldn't find the culvert, they couldn't get the men. So they hired this guy and he had it done in a day.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's no lie. Yeah.
Wow. Great that he was there and that he had the availability.
Yeah, and we'll even say his name, Jason Nadeau. He was a guy.
All right. Well, thanks to Jason. If you're listening to this,
yes.
Our drivers owe you one.
Yeah.
This has been incredibly informative and very delightful. Before we go, Doug or Cheryl, any final remarks about roads, the future of roads?
Well, the future roads up here depend on how much money we can get. We're giving out too much money. We're not getting enough is the problem.
It's a frequent line that we are hearing, and certainly feel for you. You're doing great work. And I will say on behalf of MMA, we're glad you came out of the woods because Jackman is certainly needing you.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Rebecca, I don't know if you heard it, but early in that interview, I was trying to ask Doug if his title is department head or if he is the head of public works. And his response was very telling of towns like Jackman. He said, well, I'm the one. I'm the guy. And I thought that was really genuine that, you know, he is very humble as to how much he does for that town.
It just strikes me as like the municipal story very consistently, which is why I think I get really passionate about being their voice, because these are folks that are really doing incredible work in incredible ways on very limited funds or on a volunteer basis. So to demonize them in any way is often, I think, really short-sighted without digging in and finding about what their struggles are. And certainly not, having the main route into your community cut off and having to scramble to deal with that. That needs a team effort. And those interdepartmental state relationships also are key in that. Proportionally, we know, as we'll dig into your LRAP discussion with Peter Coughlan next, that proportional relationship is not mirrored in who is doing the financial lift either, and also not necessarily reflected in anything more than maybe a coupon off of what towns are spending for the maintenance of those roads as well.
No, you queued it up nicely. Our next conversation is with Peter Coughlan, director of the Community Services Division of Maine DOT. He is a great ally to municipalities. He has served on his local planning board, is a friend to MMA and our members. He's constantly involved in trainings that we do, available via phone or email for all of our members. Before we go to Peter, it's worth noting that even in towns like Jackman, there's actually a lot of partnership that goes from the local level to the state level. You know, we heard the story of Jason, a private contractor, coming to the rescue when MDOT didn't have the time or capacity to fix that road washout. Yeah. And that it's Doug busy loading up the backhoe to go help the state. This next conversation with Peter is enlightening because we do touch on what Rebecca called sort of the road coupon that the state is handing out, a pretty, I'll put it, as insignificant amount of local road assistance. So without further ado, here's Peter Coughlan. I hope you all enjoy. A state and a local municipal rock star. Peter, thanks for being with us.
Sure, it's always good to be with you guys. I've been working with MMA since the mid-'80s, so here we are again.
And real quickly, I should mention that he just wrapped up a 3-day workshop with MMA. Peter, what was that training like?
It was great. We had about 25 gentlemen and ladies with us. These folks are trying to move up within their town. We had rural, we had urban. This is a 5-day program. This is the first of 3. This was the first 3 days. Everyone left yesterday really excited, and they can't wait for the next 2 days in October. So, in fact, we've got a waiting list for more public works folks to sign up for next year.
You know, that's what I love about municipal government is that there's so many niches in it, but everyone is so excited about their domain. Glad to hear the same goes for our road infrastructure.
Oh, yeah. You got a lot, it's a changing landscape. There's a lot of, we had people with us yesterday that had 30, 40 years and getting close to retirement. But on the other hand, we've got people coming in on the other end that are just starting to learn from the older fellas.
I had mentioned that you hold roles at both the state and the local level. We're primarily going to chat about what it is that you're doing at the state at MDOT. But real quickly, what are those local hats that you wear?
Yeah, so when I first got into this with the state back in '86, municipal government was not something I had been involved in, but it didn't last long because I jumped right into it. And I live in the little town of Randolph, which happens to be the smallest town in the state of Maine by area, 2 square miles. And so I got involved with the budget committee. And since that time, I am also comp board chairman, the budget committee, the planning board chair. I'm the addressing officer. I do the website and I do a town newsletter. Been doing that for people since 1989. And since that time, I've also picked up 5 other towns that I do their websites for on the side. And I also do 2 other towns as their addressing officer. So yeah, while I work here at DOT, I couldn't tell you what's going on for state projects out there because my day takes me to municipal officials all over the state at every level and every corner.
I probably should have asked, what don't you do at the local level? That would have been an easier answer.
Even though I can say I'm wearing 13 hats in 7 different towns, sounds like a lot, but it doesn't take a real lot of time. That's what I'd rather do at night than sitting down and watching TV when there's usually nothing good on anyway.
At the state, you are the director of the Community Services Division at the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
What is that department and what does your role pertain to?
Okay, so Community Services was created by Commissioner John Melrose back in the 90s. And it kind of combined a bunch of municipal operations within the department. But basically what I do is head up the Maine Local Road Center. Training aspect is there's 1 local road center in every state. It's a federal program. And just like yesterday, we do training and technical assistance to all the towns, no matter what level. A lot of towns know me well. They get emails from me all the time. But we do training all over the state. We're trying to get our live training back up again. Every day I'm taking emails and calls from towns on whatever road or bridge or culvert problem there is out there. I've probably heard about it. Also under community services, the local road assistance program. That's the money that comes from DOT every year. This year it's about $21 million. And I take care of that and make sure that we get all the forms back and that we send the correct dollars to every town. Another thing I want to mention is that we also handle the local road inventory. So I meet with towns all the time to go over their local road mileage, because if that's wrong, your local road assistance money is wrong. So I'm always looking to update that, because most towns haven't been reviewed in probably 10 or 15 years. And again, if the mileage is wrong, you're not getting the right amount of money. I'm also in charge of road classifications. So when you hear things like state aid and local roads, and also compact areas, urban compacts. In fact, we have 4 new towns this year that are going to become compact in the state because of the census. Another thing I handle is the Adopt a Highway program, but you really don't see that much around the state. Probably 6 towns in Maine that actually created an Adopt a Highway program. But if anyone's interested in that, they can give me a call. But, after 45 years working for the state, I still love coming to work every day so I can help people all across the state.
Wow, a real slew of activities going on at CSD.
Yep.
You hit on so many of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today. So why don't we start with the classification of roads?
Sure.
Could you briefly just define what some of those terms are? What are some of those distinctions?
Okay, so there's a federal level and there's a state of Maine level per statute. On the federal level, you hear terms like arterials and major collectors and minor collectors and local roads. That's federal stuff, and that exists in every town. But correspondingly, there's a state classification system, and that's the state highways, the state aids, and the town ways. Simply put, state highways are the big major arterials that thread through the state, and those are maintained by DOT year-round. State aid roads are the ones that have been in statute for 120 years. And those are the ones that used to be town roads, used to be county roads. Then they became state aid roads back in the 1910s and 20s. And practically speaking, those are plowed by towns, but all the other maintenance is done by DOT. So it's kind of a shared thing. And then the townways are strictly local roads. So my job, even though I'm here at DOT, I deal with the local roads mostly, but when it comes to classifications, I deal with all of those things. We get requests from towns saying, I think our local road ought to be a state road now. And we'll take that, we'll analyze it, we'll make that determination following the criteria that we follow. On the other hand, we have roads that are state aid. And while most towns don't want to take any roads back, there are some state aid roads that really never should have been. And so we work with the town, we set dates, we work things out in detail. I'm all about building partnerships and working with towns to make transition smooth, because no one wants to take on more mileage. So it's all about building relationships and working with people, because I'm wearing those hats too, and I get it.
On the website, it looks like the most recent inventory that's been published was from 2017. Looks like there's about 23,000 miles of road in Maine.
Yeah.
About 2/3 of which are townway or seasonal roads.
Yes.
So much of the lifting certainly is coming down to the local level.
Absolutely. Because, and let me back up just one moment here. I forgot to mention on the state highway, state aid, townway thing, when you have an urban compact town, all of those roads, the state highway and state aid and the local roads, are maintained by that town within those boundaries. So those are the only exceptions.
For the inventory purposes, would those be still classified as state aid in the urban compact areas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything's still, Route 1 going through Brunswick and Bath is still a state highway. It's just when you cross over that compact line, that maintenance becomes the duty of the town. The inventory that you see online, that's just a basic summary of the miles per town, state highway, state aid, townway. Even though we do make inventory reviews and have been in the last 6 or 7 years, those numbers on there really don't change a whole lot. DOT maintains like 8,800 miles year round, but only half of those are state highways, which are DOT's. Everything else belongs and is split up to the 485 or so municipalities, the 3 Indian reservations, and we have 10 out of the 16 counties that have local road responsibility too.
What are some of the innate challenges maintaining such a hodgepodge of roads, both in terms of who has the authority and the responsibility, but as well as this kind of mix of funding. How is all that balanced?
Yeah, good question, Neil. Funding, the only money that comes from the state to the town is the local road assistance money. And, having just finished some training and come off the road and talk to a bunch of these folks and listen to the guys, the paving companies, and the way prices are going right now, I mean, we thought it was bad a couple of years ago, but boy, things are just getting more and more of a challenge. When one of the paving companies the other day said, we're basically not bidding anything right now per ton under $100. And then with salt, that's just gone up about $20 a ton this coming winter. That becomes even more of a challenge. And, some towns have a few miles of road and other towns have 150 miles of road. I truly don't know what's going to happen here in the near future, because you combine the deteriorating condition of most roads with the funding challenges, and we're not heading in the right direction here, both on the state level and the local level. I mean, people are just trying to keep their head above water, and that's becoming impossible in a lot of places. The best thing a town could do is put together a road plan, have a written plan, and not just have it, in someone's head or on some paper on a dashboard or something. The town really should make an effort to put a road plan together and figure out how they're going to do this.
And is that something that CSD would be able to help towns with, is putting that plan together?
Yeah. In fact, the other day we were down in Lincoln County. We did some training. We have some software many towns have used in Maine, the RSMS, Road System Management Software. And it's a basic software program that we designed to make it easy. It's not a high-tech engineering level thing. It's just a guide. It's a tool for towns to basically do their inventory, do a quick condition survey, put some repair costs on there, and then come up with a multi-year plan. And then you take that to the townspeople and try to fund this. It's a way to sustain the current meager budget you might have now, with the hope that you might get more money because you actually have a plan.
It's sort of like a comp plan, but for your roads.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, most people look at roads as worst first, because that's where the phone calls come in, because whether it's the mud or the pavement that's blown out, that's what people call about. And so money tends to go toward the worst first ones, when roads really should be considered like your house or your car, where you fix the shingles that are coming off, or you fix the rust that's going to start on your car. You keep the good roads good. And at the same time, you're balancing the need to put some money into those worst ones, because you don't want the worst roads to eat your entire budget, because you're never going to get to the ones that are halfway decent and starting to fall apart.
Huh. That's good for me to know as I drive around Maine, and I think, why hasn't this road been repaved? And it's because they're doing their best to keep the other networks sort of at par.
With the worst first attitude, that's where a lot of the money goes, because that's where people are squawking about, and people want to see them smooth and black. But from a technical or an engineering perspective, you really should be taking care of your decent stuff and do some preventative stuff or some crack sealing or something, just to keep them up there in a decent shape.
That's a very good perspective to have. So I'd like to do just a sort of a case study to sort of highlight some of what you were talking about with LRAP, the Local Road Assistance Program. And again, I pulled some data from the website, from MDOT's website. That inventory for the town of Randolph, a town that you're pretty intimately familiar with, it says that there's 11 miles of public road, 7.5 or so townway, 3.5 or so state highway.
Yeah.
And that the LRAP amount that Randolph has received over the last 11 years actually peaked in 2013, if you can believe it, at around $8,500.
Right.
That same year, Randolph submitted a response to MMA's fiscal survey. We survey all of our members on their fiscal expenses and revenues. And they had a road-related expenditure of about $138,000, which means that LRAP accounted for about 6%. I guess my question is twofold. One, do you think that this scenario is characteristic across all towns? Is Randolph really that much different? And then second, is LRAP doing enough?
Good question. I think doesn't matter what the size is. Local road assistance is going by that word assistance. It was never intended to fully fund anything. It's just in statute set by the legislature. It is 9% of the highway budget. So as the DOT highway budget goes up or down, take 9% of that floating number, and that's what goes to local road assistance. And unfortunately, when you look at the chart we have on the website that shows this year and I think back 10 years, what we're paying now is about the same as what we did back then. And you look at that and say, that isn't right. On the other hand, that is set by the legislature. They were the ones that make the decisions, and 9% is the figure. Unless that changes, that's a legislative decision to make that happen. But, I get that number and I make sure it gets distributed to the right people. So local road assistance in most towns is just a small piece of what's really needed. For instance, in Randolph, we're fortunate to be able to put together a plan for our roads. We know how much it's going to cost. I mean, we just spent something like $700,000 on a neighborhood street where we had to reconstruct it. And unbelievably, when we went to the town meeting vote, we put $1 million warrant article in, and there was not a single question from anybody asking, where's this money going to go? And it just, after that passed, I looked at the board and I said, what just happened? But people understand that it's expensive and they want the roads fixed. The local road assistance is just a small piece of what's really needed. But most of that money that's needed really just comes from the property tax or excise tax, if that's what towns choose to use.
I don't have my calculator in front of me. $8,500 in LRAP compared to $700,000 for one road at
nothing.
1% or just over. Wow. So what would you say to towns that are both struggling with inflationary costs and a tight labor market? Maybe they have some delayed maintenance because of the pandemic early on. A lot of towns pushed off road repairs and maintenance. You had mentioned sort of a road plan, but is that going to be enough?
No, but the other thing is being smart about what you do, whether it's having a road plan or actually picking the right repair that you ought to be doing. Because sometimes, typical in Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, with the way local governments work, people coming and going all the time. There's a large number of towns in Maine that have people that come in and they get voted in, whether they're a road commissioner or a select person, and they really, they're all of a sudden responsible for a lot of things, including roads. And lots of times I'll see towns just pave roads and spend big money with no specs, or they do it just before snow flies in November. And then they call me in April and say, Pete, can you come out and look at this road? Because there's cracks starting in it. We just paved it last September. And my first question is, did you have a spec? Did you have a contract? And many times it's no. So there's a lot of ways that we could help maybe put some simpler specs together so that you've got at least some direction and some protection to make sure that these repairs last. Because if you struggle to come up with money to pave a road or do any repair, you want to make darn sure that it's done correctly. And that's not just calling someone up or having someone come in and do the same old that they've always done. It's good to have some specs and make sure that someone actually goes out there and inspects something once in a while. We've always said, you got the paving crew in town. Well, go out there with a sample bucket, a thermometer, and a spec book and make it look like you know what you're doing. Take a sample. They're going to ask, what are you doing? And say, I'm taking a sample. I'm going to test it. Well, that puts some accountability on them instead of what typically happens in a lot of towns where the paver shows up and no one knows it got paved until 3 days later. That's not good. You need to have some sort of quality control and make sure you're getting what you're paying for. So, yeah, it's hard to come up with money, but you also should make sure that you're doing it right. You've got some specs, and someone's actually going to keep an eye on things when they're happening.
Hey, to go full circle, it sounds like some advice would be show up to this 5-day training so you know what the right project is and then the right way to do it.
Yeah, but you don't need the 5-day training. I mean, we do workshops all over the state on a variety of subjects. What we did in the last 3 days, we have probably 4 or 5 separate workshops just on those specific things. Like we have one day on paving, how to put a good contract together, how to go out and do some simple inspection. What should the specs be? What should you look for as a municipal official when the paving company comes into town?
Before we wrap up, I just have to bring up this topic. It's not really in your ball house or our wheelhouse here at MMA, but private roads.
Yeah.
What's going on with there? Why does it seem to be such a large and loud conversation around them?
Part of it is I think there's a lot of people moving into Maine, and I think anybody listening to this here knows that there's people moving into Maine from probably somewhere south, and they're buying properties sight unseen, and they're ended up on public or private roads, and then they don't know how Maine works, and they expect all of a sudden town to do something. And like when I can almost guarantee that when this first snow starts flying in a month or two, that you're going to have some people saying, what do you mean you're not going to plow our road? No one investigated the condition of the road, the legal status of the road before they bought the property. But I get calls all the time from people that live on private roads, and I take them and I talk to them. But we got so many private roads in the state of Maine and so many people buying these properties out there. And I don't know the realty business, but I would hope that there was some sort of question on there that if you're going to buy some property, do you know who's going to maintain the road? Because then they want the town to take it over. And that's just not going to happen in most cases.
Yeah, I'm sure you're getting those calls. I know that our municipal members are getting those calls. And
one other quick note here too, Neil, is that it's real important if a town actually votes to take on a road from private to public, and now it's a town road, their addressing officer needs to make sure that they change the status of that road in the 911 system through the PUC and the 911 Bureau, because when that happens, towns don't know this, but I at DOT get that same note to make it a public road and then start paying you local road assistance. If the addressing officer doesn't do that, 911 doesn't know, I don't know, and your dollars are wrong. So it's important for people when something changes to make sure the addressing officer does what they're supposed to do, because I'll hear about it.
That's a great note. Towns that are taking on the responsibility of these roads from private to public, make sure to record that with your local addressing officer. Before we sign off, any final remarks that we missed?
I would just say that if anybody's looking for any sort of technical assistance, give me a call, send me an email. I'll be there. We can help. We've also got a guy that's a road ranger. We've got a fellow that's a bridge ranger. If you need someone to come out and look at a road and help you with some road advice or some bridge advice, give us a call. We're here to help you.
I like the name of that, a road ranger. Well, this has been really great. Thank you for your time today. And
all right. Thanks, Neil, very much. It's always a pleasure.
Neil, that was a great interview with Peter. And I think there are a couple of things that are highlighted there is that there is a need for planning, but planning also kind of assumes that you're not just managing chaos, which we know often is what you're doing at the municipal level. He makes a good argument for being a little bit more cohesive in that review, but we also know that municipalities are getting hit by their local communities, by the people that hit their potholes on that damaged road, even though the degradation might be more important to maintain. And the people that are the loudest wheel are a little bit hard to ignore when you're trying to make those decisions, because they're the people that are paying the bill. And they're the people that want to make sure that their front ends aren't unaligned on a really bad road, or that it's not a safety hazard. Motorcyclists, as I am one, road conditions and health are extremely poor, and we make decisions about where we go based upon that.
Peter did touch on it, which is the approach to do worst first, or should you have a road plan in which you're kind of keeping up with the maintenance of roads? But it did seem a little bit as if there was a belief from MDOT that towns aren't thinking critically about their roads, that they aren't thinking with forethought, and they don't have a systematic approach. And while that might be true in some areas, I don't believe that's the case in the majority of towns. That just like we have our 10-year comp plans, towns are thinking about what is the list of priorities. But it's tough to stay on that list and to stay in order when you get washouts like you do in Jackman. Entire sections of roads just gone. Or as you were saying, a new pothole that arises that creates a safety issue. It's one thing for these roads to be nuisances, a little bumpy maybe, but to actually create a safety issue for residents or motorcyclists, bikers, we have to share the road, that it becomes very difficult to stay to that road list.
Absolutely. And my next interview, that's a really good segue into, is with Rudy, who brings up some of the key understandings of the broader context of roads, and that is the history of how roads develop and what towns have to have inherited as a result of those obligations. But it's pretty important to note that vast majority of Maine roads are essentially horse and buggy trails that have skinny mix slapped over them. And if you were to build a road to a functional standard, it would be $1 million a mile. Most communities could not afford that lift. So they're really trying to make do. And Rudy has a full-time public works department, but he also is heavily reliant on contractors because of the history of the way in which roads developed in Gray. And he's going to give us a little bit of a background on the both water quality issues that poses, the development pressures that exist as a result of that good deed that community did for the residents of some longstanding camp roads. Poses a real challenge, and it puts the town in between competing interests.
I'm very excited for this one. I know that private roads have been sort of a sticky subject for our members in the past. Here's Nate, town manager from Gray.
I am here with Rudy, who is town manager for the town of Gray, Maine, which has some important water resources, probably a number of roads. I'm not going to put you on the spot because I'm pulling you out of a meeting to ask this. But if you happen to know the miles, the number of miles you had for roads, that would be great. If you don't worry about it. But you have some really long developed communities at which some point in time back in the 70s, the town agreed with folks who lived on a private road that had a public easement on that road to maintain that during the winter so that they had access to what were camps, correct?
That's correct. So over the years, the camps along Gray's major bodies of water have developed into neighborhoods with 3-season or 4-season houses that have outbuildings and garages and in-law apartments and other amenities that you would expect to see in a subdivision neighborhood. But they were built along the waterfronts and are serviced by camp roads that have had a public easement on them that we've used to provide winter maintenance, plowing, and salting and sanding these camp roads. And there are 30 miles of private roads with public easements for winter maintenance in Gray, of which 12 miles of them are paved. And of those 12 paved miles, 5 miles we know have been documented to meet the town's subdivision road construction standard, which is the minimum standard for road construction that we have in the town of Gray.
Most of these were established a long, long time ago, long before.
Yes, they were.
There was a lot of mandated maintenance, and the town just decided that was a good faith effort for those folks. But that's since expanded, right? So those communities have grown significantly along those camp roads.
The properties that used to be camps are now much more built out, and probably, I don't know, but I'll speculate if they're anything like a lot of the other waterfront properties in Maine, that they maybe sold off parcels on either side of the house and somebody else built another dwelling there. So they're a lot denser than your normal subdivision type development neighborhood would be.
Do you have off the top of your head an idea of how much the town of Gray has to spend on road maintenance annually?
Just for the private road maintenance, we spend around $300,000.
Wow.
And that's contracted services. We have a couple of contractors who are plowing three routes right now. Just like every other sector in the economy right now, responses to those contracts are pretty limited. And there's always concern that we're just not going to find a contractor who's willing to plow the roads. They're very difficult roads to plow. They're not surfaced with asphalt, so they have tendencies to wash out. They need to be graded, or else they get sort of bumpy, let's say. And those bumps can be really hard on the small vehicles that need to be used for plowing them. You can't run a giant plow truck with a 23-foot blade, an extension down a camp road. So if you're in a light-duty pickup, 1-ton with a blade on it, it's bumpy and it's hard on the vehicle. So the driver gets fatigued, the vehicle gets fatigued. The wear and tear on the vehicle means that the cost for the contractor is higher, and they have to factor that cost into their bid and whether they're willing to do the work. And the human factor is plowing those roads can be painful. And some people will elect not to do it because it's physically difficult.
Yeah, that's a key point that I don't think we think a lot about, because we just think, well, they're giant trucks. There's not a big factor.
A large truck that's weighed down with a ton of sand and salt and has a plow blade on the front is not going to, it's not going to ride as smooth as a Buick.
It's only fun for a little bit.
Yeah, right.
And then after 8 hours, it's a little hard on the body.
Absolutely.
So would you speak a little bit about the importance of those roads and how they might factor into water quality?
Well, the roads are important because they serve residents who are a lot of longtime residents, multi-generational residents on waterfront properties that have, very high taxable value for the town. And so they're part of our community, and we want to provide them with the level of service that they are entitled to under the Gray's practices and the agreements that we've made in the past. Those neighborhoods have built up over time, and I think the demand there has gone up for, I think an expectation of higher and higher levels of service from the local government. And I certainly understand why people would feel that way. The balance is in between the ecological protection of those surface water sheds and the increasing reports that we have of overloading the bodies of water with nutrients. Perhaps it comes from fertilizers people are using on their lawns. Perhaps it comes from pet waste. Perhaps it comes from, other sources like maybe fuel for boats. It's hard to know. And so there are lake associations who try to keep track of that. They do testing. There's organizations that monitor boats coming into bodies of water for milfoil. We know we have algae blooms. We do testing in the swimming area on one of our bodies of water. And we know that the E. coli levels have gone up. The water's sometimes not usable, and we have to close the beach. And some of that stuff is normal for anywhere, but we're just seeing increasing trends. So on one hand, the town is supporting the local groups that are trying to protect water quality. And on the other hand, we're plowing and salting and sanding these roads. And there's some concern that sanding and salting camp roads along sensitive bodies of water could be working at crossed purposes. And if we increase the volume of sand and salt that we're applying, or if we put in finished roads, asphalt paved roads, that's only going to encourage even more development on the waterfront, which will put even more of an ecological burden on the surface water, potentially degrade the quality of the water to the point where the current level of recreational use might be jeopardized. So I don't claim to be a water quality expert, and I don't want to make bombastic and scary statements about, how much and how long it will take for a condition like that to be met. It's just a question that we need to be asking as we're talking about the big picture and the long-term effect of the town's involvement in balancing the needs of these neighborhoods for the both for the benefit of the neighborhoods, but also for the general public health and welfare.
Yeah, it's kind of like the tragedy of the commons. You have this massive resource that needs to exist for the benefit of everybody, including those property owners, because I imagine when algae blooms happen, their property value actually goes down if that resource becomes degraded to a level at which no one really wants to hang out in front of. But at the same time, that access piece to that property is important to them. And the town is caught in between both of those vitally important interests.
In the long term, I think it could affect property values. And in the short term, it might affect the attractiveness of some of these properties for short-term rentals, which we have an increasing number of short-term rental units on those waterfront properties. So there's another policy question for elected officials. Do you want to monitor? Do you want to regulate the short-term rental industry? Are there actually negative effects or potential negative effects from having short-term rentals in what is increasingly a residential neighborhood that happens to be waterfront neighborhood also?
Yeah, that's another whole podcast we're going to dive into, and I'm also going to lean on you for that too. So,
okay.
So I hope this experience won't be one that is off-putting for that in the future.
I always enjoy your company.
That is mutually felt, Nate. When you're talking about paving roads, it might make that maintenance piece easier, but it might also speed all of those nutrients down to that water body, right?
Because they could potentially wash out faster rather than absorbing into the ground, which is not necessarily a great thing either, because then those absorbed nutrients are going to possibly plume out over time.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know I'm not going to try to quantify the extent of that damage, but it just seems like a reasonable conversation to have. I think there is potential for the nutrients to wash into culverts faster on a paved road. I also think that those paved roads will become faster traveled roads with more traffic volume. So there's a trade-off there also. Paving a road is going to serve the residents, but it's also going to make it more attractive for non-residents who are passing through to use those roads as an alternate to, other roads that might be more attractive to them because they are paved.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of other roads in Gray too that you're maintaining on a regular basis?
Yes, many lane miles of roads that our Public Works Department provides winter maintenance for. And again, we have a fleet of large trucks that do that.
So you kind of have a mixture of contracts and Public Works dedicated trucks.
Yes. Gray and the other lakefront or waterfront communities in the Sebago Lakes area have a unique relationship with those residents where we provide that winter maintenance service. In most other Maine communities, my understanding is that they don't, and it's against their town charters for public vehicles to be used to provide service on private property, and that's why there's the public easement. But that's rare, from my understanding. We're in the extreme minority.
Yeah, quite frequently, if it's a privately established road, there isn't necessarily a public easement. And there's a lot of conversation that I hope that we'll have in the future about the definitions of roads, because the definitions matter as to whether or not you can expend public funds on them or not. And they often are conflated and confused unless you've spent a lot of time and are sick like the rest of us and on defining what those roads are: abandoned, discontinued, public ways. Actually, the majority or a large portion of Maine's roads aren't owned by the municipality underneath. They were just a public way that was established long, long ago. So there's a whole bunch of mix of ownership there and some kind of cool history if you're a history geek, right?
We have a lot of rots and things like that in Gray also. So
out of your total municipal budget, how much of that do you think is taken up by roads? I mean,
it's a large portion of the budget. I can't tell you right offhand, but if you put a pie chart together of all the different departments, Public Works is a big piece of pie.
That's pretty much the trend that we know statewide. Do you get a lot of state, I guess it used to be called LRAP money, local roads assistance?
Yeah, LRAP. We get a portion of that. We do have several local, what do you call them, state aid roads. Gray has several state highways that run through our municipality to serve people who are commuting from other places. And we have some partnership with Maine DOT on those. It's not it's not an insignificant amount of money, but it's not the bulk of our budget by any stretch of the imagination.
Not proportional to the amount that you have to expend in reality. Do you know anything about the contract? So I know that like the collective purchasing of salt and sand sometimes is a benefit or not. But do you see any impact on your public works compared to how they have to compete maybe for state contracts for either purchasing or for maintenance at all, or supplying paving services?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends. In recent years, because of the shortages with COVID, we've had to be more thoughtful in our sourcing those materials, and so we're paying a little bit more for salt than we used to. We would frequently, in the last few years, we've had mild winters, so we've had a surplus of salt at the end of the season that we've carried over, and other aggregates like sand and whatnot also, and other chemicals. But it's changing just in the last year. Sourcing, we're having to front load our salt purchases. We're having to source salt from other vendors. That's fine. It's changing the landscape of like bulk purchasing agreements with GPCOG, Greater Portland Council of Governments, or through the state. And interestingly, depending on where you are in a regional hub, some communities do better on bulk pricing and some do worse because of the transportation fee. So if you're the furthest one in the Willy Wax, you're going to pay more for the transportation fee than the municipality that's closest to the salt provider. And in some cases, that makes a difference. And it's the deciding factor between whether you bid out on your own, take the state bid, or go with a GPCOG or a similar type of regional organization.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't even think about that piece. That's probably going to blossom, I would think, even further with the.
Well, yeah. And here's another one, culverts. We budgeted for culverts for this year and thought we might come in under budget, and we're over budget because after the war started in Ukraine, the prices shot up. The price of metal shot up. So the price of culverts shot up, and we'll make it work out. But if the price of everything shoots up like culverts did, we're going to have a hard time.
Geopolitical influence on local Maine culverts. That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm. And they're projecting, higher energy costs, higher oil, fuel costs, higher electricity costs for next year's budget. So when we look at next year's budget, maybe in recent years, thanks to the legislature restoring the full legal funding of revenue sharing, we've been able to do some maintenance projects that we've put off for a while. But perhaps in next year's budget, we're going to have to refocus on wages and the increased cost in certain supplies because of the war in Ukraine and, what other market factors related to that.
That was really great. And I super appreciate you jumping in. And as always, you're an absolute rock star on this and super knowledgeable. The private roads things in the meeting, I was like, I got to grab you.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, Nate.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I do understand the predicament that towns and cities are in when considering to take over these roads. As you mentioned, $1 million per mile is a lot to explain.
Yeah, in some instances, a lot of those roads go down to important waters of the state that belong to everybody. And that access is supposed to be protected and is facilitated as a result of those historic decisions. But there's also this pushback from the folks that live down there in some cases as well, or even the construction of private roads to these resources that keeps people out. So there is really good conversation as well about the need for public easements over these access points to facilitate accessing a number of important shared owned resources that are historically vital to the way Maine is and the way we live here. So there's an argument on both sides of that, as well as the ability for someone to get to their property inherently improves the value of that property. But who pays for that when it is one house, two houses, or it's a bank of houses? And what implications that might have for the future are really worth having a conversation about. And in most cases, natural processes allow where there is increased development that municipalities do step up to the plate and they assume those roads and bring them in. And they also abandon roads over history and time for a number of reasons, but mostly is lack of use. So if someone comes in and hasn't lived on the property for 50 years and now wants to build a subdivision, there's no obligation for that community to reignite that interest until it becomes of value to the rest of that community.
It's certainly an ongoing conversation and one happening in most of our towns, whether we're aware of it or not. I'll just quickly give two anecdotes. First, the legislature last session was very interested in passing on or making it easier for municipalities to take on the responsibility of private roads. So there's certainly a state interest at play. And it touches on a lot of what Nate and you were just saying, is that there is a environmental protection element here. And if private residents aren't doing their piece, then maybe it's time for municipalities to step up. But it certainly is going to be expensive, and it's going to take a professional archivist some time to figure out who really is in control of that deed, who owns the road.
Yeah, there's also an important caveat here, like a truly private road has zero ability for public institutions to expend public funds on, because you cannot expend public goods for private interests. There is a constitutional question that without those public easements, which means you don't get to determine that someone can't come down a public easement, there is no ability for the public to own that good. But there's also no ability for that town to actually provide any sort of services beyond what is emergency services and necessary. So there was a special and private law that tried to take the same situation that exists in Gray, in Wyndham, and kind of deal with that in a holistic way, because they didn't have those public easement arrangements established in deeds. And I think that might be what you're talking about. But there is a working group that is looking at that, because we also have had a huge influx of people that have moved here that don't understand how roads are established or created, that feel as though because they now own property, that somehow that obligates that community to maintaining what essentially is their driveway. And that is not the case. And that is why caveat emptor was created. It was specifically around real estate transactions. And you need to be an informed buyer as much as the town needs to uphold its obligations. But you don't get to expand the duties because you didn't read, or you didn't follow due diligence processes that are naturally there and bought something sight unseen.
It's a web of issues just as complicated as our web and network of roads. But we have passed the 1 hour mark. That's how much there is to say on this topic. We probably could have gone for another 5 hours on this one. But before we leave, we'd like to just share a little bit of municipal good news. This comes direct from MMA, which is our convention is occurring next week, October 5th and 6th. Come out to Bangor Cross Insurance Center. It's a great slate of presentations. Rebecca, what are you looking forward to there?
It is truly a time to celebrate. It'll be our first in-person, fully convention since the pandemic hit. So it is a time for us to celebrate, and celebrate is the focus for our convention, but we're also being really future focused and future thinking. So one of our keynote speakers actually is a futurist, Rebecca Ryan, who's going to look at how leaders can actually strategically think about the future and some of the signals that they should be watching out for in local government and how to position themselves. We're also really focused on public safety employee health and retention and support. And we're going to dive down into a number of issues related to some of the public safety crises that we're feeling across the state and in all communities. And we're looking at ways in which we can change our work culture in general and our view of these traditionally attractive industries that have no longer become attractive for a variety of reasons. And then we're also going to be helping municipal leaders understand how to respond in times of crisis, and what our system, our integrated system that we dove into last podcast, really is set to work, and how they can leverage that and help their public safety professionals responding in crisis.
Truly looking forward to being able to spectate some. We should mention that Peter Coughlan, who was interviewed here today, is actually doing 2 sessions. more to be heard about roads. If today's podcast piqued your interest, make sure to make it to Bangor next week. We can't wait to see you. And by the way, Rebecca and I will be there in person capturing voices and stories from municipal officials.
If you stop by, you just might be able to win one of our amazing new mugs, Potholes in Politics, with our sweet new label. I tweeted out a picture of that on our MMA advocacy Twitter page. So like us and follow us and subscribe to this podcast. And please do provide us some feedback. We love hearing it, and we are deeply grateful for our listeners.
Rebecca, I am feeling like we have a real podcast going here. We have received public comment in our inbox. We now have swag and giveaways. So we're hearing over 300 listens and downloads.
And it hasn't been hater driven so far. And we have a pretty dedicated listener in Germany who I'm dying to find out who that is. So if you're listening to us from Germany, please do drop us a note.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in again. This has been Neil and Rebecca from Maine Municipal Association, and we'll see you at the convention.
See you at the convention, and come celebrate with us.